by. Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation on the internal customer, staff retention, and communication. This session will be recorded. All participants' lines will remain in a listen-only mode. We will be opening the phone lines periodically as comments and questions are encouraged. If you experience technical difficulty, please press *0 for assistance. Now, I'd like to direct the audience to force their screen to full view by pressing the small icon located in the bottom right corner of your screen. You are looking for a blue box with arrows pointing out from the corners. Please click that icon now to bring the presentation to full view, or you may press F5. At this time, I'll turn the podium to Liz Buttrey.
Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. I am Liz Buttrey, the training coordinator at the CCC. I'd like to take a moment to thank Louise, Haynes, and Chally for presenting for us today. And like was just mentioned, we are hoping for this to be an interactive presentation with lots of opportunities for discussion, and we will open up the phone lines or request for open up the phone lines and ask you to press *1 if you have any comments or feedback that you would like to contribute. With that, I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to Chally.
All right, thank you very much, Liz. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and making it to this rescheduled training. We really appreciate everybody's time in coming out. We want to, before I get into the training objectives, we want to talk a little bit about sort of the concept here. What we're going to be presenting today, we certainly hope to bring you some new and relevant information, but a lot of the concepts we're going to be talking about may be things you are already doing or have already done in the past. The real goal is to try and, as Liz talked about, to have a discussion about these things and also to get people to think about having a real and a concrete plan on communicating and ultimately retaining their study staff throughout a research trial, doing the best we can to do that, and then really thinking about the ways and the steps involved with doing that. So when we talk about internal customer, what we're really talking about is the research staff, the people who are actually working on the trial. That being said, we'll move on to the training objectives. The things we're going to try and cover today are why continuity matters, what's the value of having your staff and having your staff throughout the research trial, the impact of staff retention through management, workplace culture, job design, opportunities, rewards, and relationship building. We're going to then move on to the importance of the internal customer. What's the value in this staff member? What's the value in taking care of this internal customer? And then retention through empowerment and growth of individuals. And finally, mentoring recommendations and mentoring, a discussion of mentoring of research staff and staff in general.
Okay, see who's out there. Let's take a couple polling questions to get an idea of who we have in the audience. So if you don't mind, could you specify your current role? The polls are now open. I'm going to go ahead and just show the results so that everybody can see what's being populated. All right, looks like we have about 50% falling in the other category and 16 even for a research assistant, study coordinator, and RRTC staff. So now I want to ask another polling question. Please clarify your years of experience with the CTN. Okay, we have about, I'll go ahead and show these results as well. We have about 63 with a year or less experience with the CTN. Now I'm going to go ahead to the next polling question. How many CTN protocols have you worked on? 0 to 1, 2 to 3, or more than 3? Then I'm just going to go ahead and show the results. Okay, about 58% with 1 or less, 25 with 3 or more, 16% with 2 or 3. Now, just by comparison, let's ask the next polling question. How many non-CTN clinical trials have you worked on? I'll go ahead and show those results because it's kind of interesting, 50-50 with less than 1 or more than 3. Great. So that gives us an idea of who we have on board with us today. Jack, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the presentation.
Great. It seems like we have a pretty good mix of people with quite a bit of CTN experience, quite a bit of research experience, and people who are relatively new to CTN and potentially relatively new to research. I think that's a good mix, and I think everybody's perspective will add a lot to the discussion. And we again really encourage when we get there to talk about and bring those points forward for discussion. Louise, do you have any comments on who's on board here?
No, it is an interesting mix with a lot of people who did not define themselves as study coordinators or RAs, a large number of others. So when we get a chance to hear from people, I'd be interested to know what roles that might be. But certainly it sounds like that there's some people who are on the call today for whom some of the things that we'll be talking about may not be as familiar, since a lot of our experience will come from the CTN, and about half the people have some CTN experience, but a lot of people don't. So that will be very interesting discussion.
Great. All right. We're going to go ahead and move forward into the presentation, and we'll start talking about why staff continuity matters. Looking at this from outside of research initially, and just a business perspective, it was estimated in 2006 that the cost to find, hire, and train new staff caused a loss in productivity of about a third to half of an individual's annual salary. Again, those were the estimates in 2006. By 2010, those numbers had increased to half to 2 times an individual's annual salary. Personally, my perspective on this, or what I think happened here, was not that there was this radical shift in how much this cost. I think in 2010 there was a better understanding of the total cost and the total loss that occurred when there was staff turnover. So that's something to keep in mind from a monetary perspective. And we're going to talk about in research that there's even more involved here. It's not just from a monetary perspective of productivity what you're losing, but from a training perspective, how extensive the losses are if you have staff turnover. So, in research, especially within the CTN, what we want to talk about is, protocol expertise and training that happens before the research trial is a large degree of a large time commitment for the staff members. In fact, in an ideal situation, we're going to hire staff about 3 months before the trial launches. We're going to hire them 4 to 6 weeks before the investigators meeting, allowing them to in-process at their treatment facility or wherever the site is, or perhaps at the node, allow them to work through all those internal processes, start reading the protocol, to start taking care of any other trainings that would be required, human subjects protection, good clinical practices, any other pre-trainings that are specific to the protocol. And then there's oftentimes a 4 to 6 week period after the investigators meeting while the site's waiting to be endorsed. Again, a great deal of time is spent on training and figuring out how to operationalize this study at this particular site. So if we take a look at that and using that sort of 3-month time frame as a primer, let's say the pre-investigators meeting. So before the investigators meetings happens, let's say we have 6 weeks of staff time. We guesstimate that 75% of that time will be spent on training in some capacity or another. That's 180 hours. Site-specific training, onboarding, again, reading the protocol, doing all those sorts of activities. Then the investigators meeting itself. We're talking about 2 to 4 days of intense in-person training. It's not going to be able to be replicated for any replacement staff. You're not going to be able to send replacement staff to an investigators meeting. There's also the cost associated with travel and the loss of interacting and networking with the larger team, the larger research team, even the research team at the site that they're going to be working.
And I think that's a very significant point, that the investigators meeting is so critical in terms of new staff understanding the bigger context of the study, knowing people across the country that they're going to be on calls with for the next couple of years, and that when that experience is lost or not available to a staff member, I think it really makes it very difficult for them to fully understand the study and to feel totally a part of the team. I think it really presents some challenges.
I totally agree, and it's something we have to be conscious of. And it's also the real value in making sure that we hire people before the investigators meeting and allow them to do all the prep work up front. And so then if we look after the investigators meeting, so let's say we have another 6 weeks ballpark, let's say that half the staff's time at that point is dedicated to training. Under this model, by the time the study launches, there'll be 300 hours worth of training plus an entire investigators meeting invested in this individual before they ever start the trial, not counting the expertise that's going to be gained by launching a trial at a particular site. So in conjunction with the numbers we were talking about earlier, the business side of the house in terms of how much monetarily is lost, with a research staff member, you're also talking about all this training that's lost that is virtually impossible to replicate or very difficult to replicate. So staff expertise is going to be developed by operationalizing the study at this particular site. And we do a good job in the CTN, in my opinion, of now producing similar results at all of our sites, using the same tools and using the same tools in the same way and ultimately collecting the same data. But the way it's implemented from site to site is slightly different because there's differences amongst these sites. There's differences among the way these sites are staffed, are structured, interact with each other, and that piece of it can only be learned at that site level too, and that's another expertise that's lost when you lose a staff member. And again, you can't really develop this, like it says on the slide, your staff is your most valuable resource, and losing staff can cause productivity to come to a halt, and it may take months to get back to where you were functioning before, if you're ever able to. So at this point, we kind of want to ask a poll question and open it up again to just sort of talk about how often you've experienced a staff turnover during a study.
Letting a couple responses collect. I'm going to go ahead and show the results. Jack, can you go over the results?
Sure. So it looks like we only have one response that says rarely. Nobody says always, which is good. That would be a worrisome sign if you always have staff turnover at every trial. Sometimes and often seem to have the most responses, and some people don't know. I think that they're new to the situation, and we appreciate. That's why we put that option in there. So it looks like, based upon these results, that most people experience this, whether it's sometimes or often within their research trials. And we sort of talked about how impactful it can be, and we're going to get into that and open up the phone lines in just a second and talk about sort of that impact and what it does to a trial. Any comments about these numbers, Louise?
No, I think that's what I would have expected to see, that it does happen sometimes. I think it's not just the frequency with which it happens, but sort of the impact on the study, and we're going to get to that.
Right. The realization of the impact when you live through it. Okay. There you go.
So, staff continuity matters, and it matters to everyone. It's not just a management issue. It's not just a study leadership issue. Losing any staff member is going to affect your workload. It's going to affect everybody at every level within the research study. And reestablishing continuity and structure and function is going to take time. To that point, we want to talk a little bit about team development, and Liz is going to take us through sort of the team development stages.
Okay, so as just a project management way of looking at things, as a team starts to develop, they first have their forming stage, which would typically happen at the investigator meetings. Now, this is the honeymoon phase where everybody's just getting to know each other and they're learning their roles. And there's a good bit of collaboration and helping each other out at that point. And then you move forward to the storming phase, which is pretty much marked by internal conflict and discomfort. People are starting to understand their role, and they're starting to have some opinions about processes in which they're being involved with. And they start to differentiate themselves as an individual from the group. And then the progression moves to norming, where people start to normalize, and they start accepting what their role is versus what other people's role is. And one of the terms that I've heard of that I really liked is called Q-tip, and where the people just kind of learn to not take things personally. They just start to accept what's going on around them. And they also start to get a really good feel for who they are in the context of this group, because as I'm sure you've experienced, you're a little bit different depending on who you're with. And then you move on to the performing stage. The norms are established, relationships become functional, and this is when productivity is at its peak. And then as the project starts to close out, you move towards the adjourning stage. You start to feel feelings of loss and kind of some anxiety for new change coming your way. But these are the typical stages, regardless of what study you're in, that you can expect to observe in group stage development.
And it's great when groups are able to go through those stages together. What happens is if you have staff turnover, then people are going to be at different phases in that continuum, and it makes it even more challenging. And it's just another component of trying to get back to a cohesive team.
Right. So you might spend a lot of time cycling back to the forming stage or back to the storming and norming stages before you reach the performing stage. So it does have an impact on the full group stage development.
So we wanted to open it up to the group and ask people to share experiences of any staff loss during a research trial. You can open up your phone line by hitting *1, and we encourage you to do so at this time and share some experiences with us.
And no one has queued up at this time.
Okay. There's been, in my 3.5 years or so with the CCC, I've seen quite a few of these different situations. I saw a situation that was pretty interesting where within the span of a week, for completely different reasons, a site lost both its study coordinator and one of its 2 research assistants, which was a huge challenge. And what ultimately happened in that circumstance is the node got involved, and our ROTC staff ultimately started trying to function, at least over the short term, as research staff. And that's a challenge. They certainly knew the study, but it was outside of their role, outside of what they were able to do. Fortunately, from other experiences, they had quite a bit of the training, quite a bit of the knowledge base required. But it was sort of a shock to the whole system for somebody who had one role to jump into a completely different role, more of an active role versus a passive role. And it was a bit of a challenge. Anybody else have any experiences they want to share at this point?
Well, I could talk a little bit about sort of a unique experience, a very challenging experience that we had in an earlier study. It was an adolescent medication trial. And the staffing pattern required a nurse. And yet using medication in our community treatment program was not something that had been done previously. And nurses were not typically part of the staffing of the community treatment program. So we really struggled to find a nurse and bring a nurse on as part of the team and to work within the community treatment program and to work within research. And in fact, during the course of the study, which took a couple of years and was kind of a tough study to begin with, I think we went through 5 nurses, and it was just very distracting to try to run the study and never know exactly how you were going to be managing that piece. Eventually, we made a change and adapted the nursing role and split it up between the RA and the physician on the study. So we just had to really change things around in order to accommodate that. But it was very, very challenging, and I think for different reasons, we just had a very difficult time maintaining continuity with that one role.
Thanks, Louise. Anybody else in the audience have any examples or comments they want to share at this point?
We do have 2 people in the queue at this time.
Great.
First, we'll hear from Davina Jones.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you could hear me. Yeah, I have actually worked on about 4 different studies for CTN and then 4 or 5 others. One of the worst ones was as far as retention of staff. We lost, in the course of the study, 2 research assistants, 3 interventionists, and it had, we had known from other studies that we had done to always make sure you have, extra staff trained as backups. So there was myself and another staff member that were able to step in, but we ended up, as the research coordinator, ended up doing research assistant position as well as the interventionist and everything else because, it takes a decent amount of time to get staff trained. So that was a real experience. And so since then, have we really made sure that we have plenty of people trained to back up in case that kind of happens again.
No, that's a great point, Davina. Thank you very much. Yeah, cross-training, and we'll get into that more, cross-training is an invaluable thing, but even if you cross-train, the cross-train is more of a Band-Aid than a cure, and like you're talking about, you can do that over the short term, but you're going to overwhelm your staff.
Next, we'll go to Monique Weissman.
Hi, yes, during the course of this current trial, just after endorsement, after randomizing about 5 or 6 participants, the one research assistant that I had here is myself, the research coordinator, and the research assistant, and he decided to go to medical school and left. So then I was just on my own. It was right after we got endorsed, and so I was still kind of, we were just getting our feet wet, and so it was challenging for all the reasons that you mentioned. But in addition to that, it just added to the burden because then I needed to interview and hire a new research assistant. So that just added to all, doing everything on my own. So I just wanted to point that out, that's another thing that it just adds another task.
Exactly.
Yeah, and all that expertise walked out the door. I mean, how long had that person been training with you and gone to the investigators meeting? And it's kind of that illustration we were talking about up front, right?
Exactly, yeah. He went because we had our training in New York City, and so he had gone on that. And, of course, the company had invested all of that in him, the training and the travel and all of that, yeah.
Well, it's interesting. You bring up an interesting point about somebody going to medical school. In one of the other trials that I was associated with the CTN, there was a person who had planned to do the research trial and then go back and finish their PhD. And what happened was the research trial ended up going almost twice as long as anticipated, or much longer than anticipated, and this person had just sort of made the decision they couldn't wait anymore to start their PhD, and they had been through this trial without. It was a very difficult decision for them, and it was really hard for them to walk away from the trial, but they had to, their life choices, kind of drove them to do that. And that was really hard, and it was really hard for their site to recover. And this person had been the primary individual at that site for, about 3.5 years in that research trial. And not that they did everybody's job, but they knew everybody's job. They were the glue person, basically, is the way I viewed this person at that site. and that was really difficult. Even they all knew it was coming. They prepared for it. They planned for it. It wasn't a sudden thing. It was still very difficult to overcome because that person was virtually irreplaceable. Any other examples or comments?
Once again, that is *1.
Well, everybody, feel free to press *1 if you do have a comment or something that you'd like to add to the discussion. Let's move ahead to key factors impacting staff retention.
Yeah, and thank you both for bringing those examples up. Those are great. So we want to talk about key factors impacting staff retention, some areas which play a huge role in retaining staff. We want to talk about them: management, workplace culture, job design, opportunities, rewards, and relationship building. So we'll start with management. When talking about management, we're going to focus a little bit about morale. And we want to talk about sort of morale as a function of team strength, morale and productivity. I come from a military background. I was in the Navy for 16 years, and it's funny because I think morale actually started on ships. And Liz's lovely sign in the corner about the beatings continuing until morale improves is not too far from the truth. But morale really, I also come from a behavioral health background. I did behavioral health work in the Navy, and I view morale as sort of, I'm going to use a behavioral health term here, milieu, in that the feeling in the air, sort of the feeling you get when you walk into a place. You can sort of feel high morale, high functioning place, or a low morale, low functioning place, and it's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing to try and figure out if you don't have great morale, either with an individual or with the whole group, how to improve that. There's lots of different approaches. There's lots of different ways. You can look at somebody's individual job satisfaction. You can look at sort of their relationships with their peers, or relationships with their supervisors, or on the front line, or up the chain of command. Generally, research works the best as a team. Generally, it is going to be a team, whether it's comfortable or not. It's going to become a team. You're all working for the same goal. You're all working in the same way. And like we talked about a few minutes ago, cross-training is going to be so important. You're going to have to know what the person to your left and right does if they're not there for whatever reason, to be able to pick up that ball and run with it. Building good supervisors and staff morale will increase productivity. The higher your morale is, the higher your productivity will be. And really paying attention to that and being aware of that up front is something that's really important. Again, we want to kind of open up the phone lines and talk a little bit more about this morale issue. What sort of things have you seen work to achieve cohesiveness and or improve team morale? So again, hitting *1 and sharing anything you'd like at this point would be great.
And again, that is *1.
So we have a couple of trigger questions here. Is it workload that impacts your morale the most? Is it sort of the more work you have, the lower your morale, the less work you have, the higher your morale? Or how have you specifically dealt with morale drops during certain sections of the research trial? Louise and I were talking about that as we were prepping for this training, that there really are ebbs and flows within research trials, and you can almost predict them to some degree when things are going to be tougher. Louise, you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Well, sure. I think it has to do with some of those stages that Liz presented, that certainly when you're still forming the team and people are trying to figure out their role and figure out their job and how do they relate and who has authority, all of that stuff, that can be a really, really tough time. And certainly I think so many of the trials in the CTN require such a steep learning curve for RAs, particularly if they're going to be trained as interventionists as well, if they're going to be cross-trained to do various jobs within the trial. That learning curve is so steep, and I think new RAs coming in can certainly feel overwhelmed by the expectations that are placed on them. And the supervisors and leadership is trying to figure out where do they fit, how do they relate to the lead team, how do they relate to the monitors from EMMES, and just nothing is really well understood. I think that's a really tough time, and certainly I think that, that impacts morale. Another point, we always hope that recruitment is going to go well, but we get our little report cards every week on our call, and if you happen to be a site that's struggling with recruitment, in spite of all of your hardest work and best efforts, the population that you're working with just doesn't seem to have the numbers that you were hoping you would have. And you kind of feel that week after week. I think that can be really, really tough on staff morale. And by then, hopefully, though, you have a team that supports each other, and you really sort of circle the wagons and rally around, still trying to get the work done, but supporting each other through those tough times.
Thanks, Louise. Are there any comments or questions from the group at this point?
We do have one at this time from Monique Weisman.
Hi. There are obviously many things that go into it, but I think, good communication is really important, and finding out from everybody on the team what works best for them, listening to what works best for each person, because everybody works a little bit differently, and also being able to express clear expectations about what needs to get done, being very specific about how to go about doing that, and if that works for people, and if they have ideas about how to improve that. And if morale is down for whatever reason, asking what would help improve it for each individual, and basically just having patience and also having a good sense of humor.
Yeah.
So you've been cheating and looking ahead in the slides? I'm just kidding.
No, I'm just thinking of, been there. No.
We're going to get to it. We're going to get to
deal with those things.
Yeah, thank you very much. I totally agree that it really needs to be an interactive process, and communication is the hub to all of this, and that's going to be the sort of the theme throughout, and take this through. And getting to the first question here on the first small question here on the screen, at least in my experience in the military, it wasn't how much work we had to do that really had the biggest impact on that morale. It was our understanding of what the work was, what the expectations were, and why we were doing it. We would put in 13, 15-hour days if it made sense, if we understood why we were doing it, yeah, and we felt valued. But if you're building a tent out in the desert only to take it down tomorrow because it's busy work for you to do, nobody's going to be happy about that. So I think, again, that comes with communication. It comes with understanding sort of the group function. Are there any other comments or questions at this point?
We do have one additional from Davina Jones.
So I know from my experience with working on several trials that often if the counseling staff is involved in the study, is in passing on the direct intervention or whatnot, they can get really burdened with feeling like the workload is too much and there's too much expected, because it's not like their workload for the agency itself decreases while they're taking on that extra role in general. So I think that's been the most difficult part in several of the studies that I've done, is just trying to continually keep the clinical staff feeling like what they're doing is important, even though it might be adding a little extra burden to them.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think that when people have clinical responsibilities and you add research responsibilities on top of that, that they really do struggle to not be sure what's the most important, and perhaps having supervisors in two different areas with different priorities, and I think that can be a very difficult spot for somebody to be in.
Yeah, oftentimes if you end up with 2 or 3 projects, you have 2 or 3 full-time jobs. So we need to really be conscious of that, and I think you're right. And the other thing when talking to them, and I think you alluded to this, Davina, is talking about the big picture and the impact they're making, not only at the site, but in the trial and throughout the CTN, and really sort of, that's one of the biggest strengths of the CTN, is really doing the work in the treatment facilities, so we can see if this works in practice or not, and have a real impact upon affecting practice. But it's hard when something, oftentimes when things are added to your job, other things aren't taken away.
Exactly.
But I think if people sort of understand that going in, it makes it easier. It makes it easier to accept. It doesn't make it easier to do. And I think it goes back to that communication piece. Thank you very much, Davina. Any other comments or questions at this point?
There are none at this time.
Thanks, Davina. Thanks, Monique.
We'll go ahead and move forward into kind of workplace culture. We'll talk about the environment. We talked about already sort of a team atmosphere. I think research is going to be done in teams irregardless. Doing things to try and make it positive, interactive, fun. We've already heard sort of talking about sense of humor. In the interactive piece, I think is really important to involve the research staff in what's going on, and they know what's going on. Being on the calls, being part of the bigger group, being involved in sort of, or at least advised about decisions and focus of the group and in the productivity of the entire study, I think is really valuable. Evaluation and feedback. Having clear times when people are going to get feedback on not only their performance, but the site's performance and the research study as a whole. Also, if something specifically happens well, or if there's a particular area of struggle, that giving feedback at that point, using positive reinforcement, making the feedback individualized, something that makes sense to this individual. Trying to focus on effective and timely feedback will have a huge impact upon workplace culture, and ultimately, all of these things, if done well, will have an impact upon staff retention, and that's kind of why we're talking about it. The reality is, as we talk through these things, we're talking best case scenario. We're talking sort of in an ideal world, and we realize the world is never ideal, and that the best intentions are there to do all of these things. We're just trying to put it on your radar to have plans to try and do these things. And Louise can talk to sort of the real world aspect of these things in a CTP, much better than I can. You want to talk a little bit about that, Louise?
Well, I just think we all know how important it is to get feedback. It's very valuable to the employee to actually know explicitly the things that they're doing well and the things that they need to work on. And I think in a community treatment program, because of just the general pace and typical workload, supervision is something that just doesn't often get as much attention as people would like for it to. And so that's one of the things that I've noticed that's different in the research world, is because it's so important to make sure that the research intervention or the assessments or whatever the research function is being delivered correctly, that there's much more emphasis on supervision and getting feedback. And I think that's something that a lot of people really appreciate, because if they're coming from a clinical background, that's something they may not have gotten previously. And so learning new skills and learning to do things correctly is of great value to someone in terms of their own professional development.
Great. Thanks, Louise. So we want to talk a little bit about job design now. We want to be sure with job design, and this is going to vary by site and by institution, but, the ideal approach is to have a structured but flexible job design, so people have some flexibility in how they get done what they need to get done. We talk about this. We have a protocol and we have a MOP. But taking those things and actually implementing them at a site also requires a lot of local SOPs. You can think of that with these job designs too, that you have a goal and you have endpoints that you have to reach. The exact paths to reaching those endpoints may have some flexibility, and when possible, it's important to let people have that flexibility, or let them figure out the best ways they think they can get that done. That being said, it should be done in the context of clear expectations and fully knowing who the chain of command is. And that may get complicated, as we've talked about. If somebody's clinical staff and research on one side, they may have two distinct chains of command that both are competing for their time, or even a third chain of command that's competing for their time in some other capacity. having flexibility and flexible day-to-day operations and still getting the job done is really important. Also, finding a job that tries to maximize an individual's strengths while mitigating their areas where they can improve or areas they need to work on. Some people are very detail-oriented, but struggle interpersonally, struggle with the soft personal skills. Other people may do very well with big picture thinking, but have trouble with the small picture day-to-day. And as we know within research, if it didn't get documented, it didn't happen. So every box has to have the right check mark or the right piece of data in it. If somebody struggles with that, finding ways for research staff to work with each other and share responsibilities may be really valuable. But again, trying to suit them, and again, this is very much ideal world. The reality of the situation is probably everybody has to be pretty capable to do just about everything. But as major areas of focus, if you can find things that suit people's needs, they're probably going to be more successful.
Actually, I was talking with one of the study coordinators who works with me today about the challenges of job interviews. You interview someone and you think, based on, that hour or perhaps 2 sessions of interviews, that you understand some of this. But as you get to know them better and see how they work with the team and see how they work with the protocol, a lot of what you thought you knew about someone in a job interview that caused you to select that person, you may end up finding you were way off. And then if after you've invested the time that Jack has talked about in bringing that person on and getting them trained, then trying to work with their strengths and what they can do and giving them the feedback that we also mentioned to improve the things that they're not doing quite as well. But it definitely is a process over time.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I was in the military, I bounced back between individual jobs in leadership and management positions, and the reason I did that, frankly, was because I would get tired of trying to match people with job sets and thinking they had one skill set and really a different one, and doing that sort of shuffling and trying to do that work. It's difficult work, and I guess that's what we're putting forward here is that the people who are going to be managing research staff have a real challenge, because you have these group of people who are going to be the reason your study succeeds or fails at your site, and how to put them in the best positions to succeed is going to be a challenge, and is going to be a challenge sort of every day, and it's going to be a new challenge every day, and that's kind of what we're trying to talk about and give you some lessons to not only put them in the best position to succeed, but the best position to want to stay throughout the trial too. So the next thing we want to talk about are opportunities, and this is really important, I think, with this group, because oftentimes research staff are, it may be a research or research project dependent job. In other words, this may be your job for the next 2 years or as long as this research trial, but it doesn't have that sort of long-term aspect to it. So they may be using this as a stepping stone or a space holder to other opportunities. It's really, I think, important and valuable that we talk to them about what they're interested in, what their interests are, what their plans are to try and grow. If they have plans, they may be at the point where they don't have any plans. They don't know. They're doing this because the opportunity presented itself, and they don't know sort of where they're going from here. And so getting to know kind of the person, and there may be real value in, as Louise just talked about, you identify some skills that they have or some strengths that they have, and then you point those out and say, well, from my perspective, you seem to do this very well and this very well. You may want to consider this sort of career path, this sort of educational path, or whatever the case may be. But spending time with that side of the person, focused on where they want to go and what their plans are outside of the current research study is going to pay huge dividends with them being committed to the research study and being committed to staying on in the project.
Those observations can be life-changing, no doubt.
And then we want to talk a little bit about, about rewards. So, how do you reward somebody for a job well done or doing something very well, or maybe for finding a problem? I think we can reward people for finding a problem with our research study that we haven't found, that we didn't know about. I think there's huge value in that. And there are different levels that recognition can be given. It can be given at the work team level, at the individual level, the site level, study-wide, or even CTN-wide. I think the importance there, and this is where getting to know and that communicating piece with the research staff is so important, knowing what's best for them, what's going to have the most meaningful impact to them. And oftentimes I think we think it's just money or it's just time, you know what I mean? But I think, one person walking in and giving them a pat on the back and saying, you did a great job with this, I really appreciate it, would have a huge impact. Another person that wouldn't be as impactful for them, but if you went to that person and you brought them in front of the group and said that same thing, it would have a huge impact. So knowing kind of what would be most valuable or most impactful for that individual, whether it's public or private, it should be within that individual's comfort zone whenever possible, and again, should have value to the individual. There are all kinds of things out there in creative ways, and I think that's another thing the CTN does very well is creative ways of rewarding people. I've been on trials that have the star of the month or across the entire trial, and then just getting nominated from your site is a huge kudos. I mean, there's other things where a study was sending out baskets to an individual site that had done the best job in whatever area that month. There are lots of things that can be done that have huge impact and make a big difference in sort of that morale we were talking about and also the function of the site. Louise, you want to talk about this some?
Well, no, I think you've pretty much covered it. You can't say enough about the importance of finding something that people find rewarding. And sometimes it's as simple as being able to spend some individual time with, like, the site PI and get absolute feedback and talk to someone in a position of authority. That can be important for some people. So it can be concrete or very subjective. But yeah, I think you've covered it, Jack.
Great. So we want to open it up again and ask everybody again, push *1. We'd like to ask, was there a time when supervisory support or recognition was meaningful to you? What was it? How did it work? Or maybe you were the one giving the support or recognition, what you did.
Sometimes it can be as simple as recognition for doing something well and being asked to share that skill set with other people. For example, Jack, I like the way you coordinate this event. Mark is going to have to do that next month, and would you mind sharing with him how you do it? Because the way you do it really works. And that's recognition, and that's praise for doing a good job. And sharing the knowledge is sometimes it's a form of highlighting yourself and recognition.
When I was in the Navy, one of the best assets I had at my tool, the tools I had for this that I had at my disposal was I had the ability to go in and say, all right, Liz, you did a great job today. Go home. Get out of here. Take the afternoon. That's not always feasible. It may sometimes be feasible, but it was just a huge, the idea of, for me, it's like a hall pass. When everybody else is in school or at work, I get that, I get that afternoon that I didn't expect off, or whatever the case may be. I tried to be, smart with that and judicious with that in terms of not devaluing it. But something like that, a few hours was a huge deal and made a huge deal to people, and everybody else saw it too, and it wasn't sort of a competition thing as much as it was, wow, that's great, they did do a great job, and I'm glad they got some time off. Any examples from the group?
Once again, that is *1.
For me, I've had the opportunity through my career to work with some really wonderful mentors, some people that I have learned a great deal from. And one of the things that's been very meaningful to me in terms of recognition and feeling like my work was affirmed was being asked to do things with them, you know, to accompany them to something and to be part of something that really was sort of above my pay grade, and being invited by them to participate with them in something. That's been, I mean, that works for me.
No, and I agree, and you know, and I can say firsthand that I've seen Louise pass that on and bring other folks to bring research coordinators and research associates to investigators meetings or to protocol development meetings or to other preparation, and their insight is so valuable because they're the ones doing the work. They're the ones who actually sort of, when all this theoretical stuff is done, they're the ones that actually see what's working, what doesn't work, and where the rubber meets the road. And you know, and I neglected to do this earlier, but one of the reasons that we asked Louise to do this with us, and we're so happy that she accepted, is, in my opinion, she does a wonderful job of this process of communicating with her staff and in retaining her staff, and I think it's one of the reasons that she's been so successful with the research trials she's done within the CTN. And I think that she adds such valuable input to this conversation.
Thanks, Jack.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let's move on to relationship building.
So, you know, relationship building, well, maybe. Slide's coming, we think. Okay, there we go. Relationship building, you know, it's funny. I talked earlier about having a behavioral health background. And to me, I think one of the things most often taken for granted is relationship building. People just think it's going to happen. You throw 4 people together and they'll build a relationship. It's true. What kind of relationship that's going to be, how strong that relationship is, whether it involves, you know, knives and guns is a whole different thing. Sorry, maybe I went too far there. But the point is, if you want to build a solid relationship, you have to have a plan. You have to sort of go in knowing that what you want to build, especially if you're trying to build a relationship with your with people who are working on your research team. Let's focus on that. You want to have a plan of how to build that relationship, what kind of relationship you need to have, what are the tenets of that relationship going to be. And you know, it requires consistent and genuine effort. I like to use the phrase, you need to go to where somebody lives. You need to meet them where they're at and talk to them on the level that works for them, that they understand, that they're comfortable with. And you know, and you can have relationships that are unique with each of your staff members without being an equivalent. You know, you can have different approaches with everybody, and I think the real value is in doing that. And trying to pass on the information. Again, this is a team that you value the person, not just what they bring to the table, not just their productivity, not just the fact what can you do for me? To quote Janice Jackson, what have you done for me lately? There's more to it than that. If you want to retain this person, if you want this person to care about sort of the team and the project, you know, in research teams are often become more like families, because of how much work there is, because of the close proximity, because of the nature of the work and the covering for each other. And the goal here is a functional family. We all know sort of the ways to fall into a dysfunctional family, but the goal really here is you're going to become a family most likely anyhow. You want to try and be as functional family as possible. You know, and the other thing we want to talk about is all of these factors and all of these goals to try and retain staff and try and have the best environment possible. The reality is life happens. Liz maybe changed this originally. This didn't say life, but life happens. And things are, you know, you're going to lose staff. They're life circumstances. We've talked about a couple of these examples already. You know, somebody's significant other moves away or is moving to a different job. They have to move away. They have opportunities to go to medical school. They have opportunities to finish their PhD. They got, you know, the opportunity to actually lead a research trial in a different area. Whatever the case may be, we're not going to be able to fully avoid or prevent staff loss. So we talked about this quite a bit earlier. Cross-training will help you reduce the impact. in addition to cross-training, having strong standard operating procedures. You know, we talked about when we were prepping for this, that manual of operations, as much effort goes into a MOP, the reality is that there are those differences between sites. So how you implement this at a particular site, you can't take a staff member from site A and put them in South Carolina and put them in site B in Connecticut and expect them to just get up and running and function right away, because they may be doing the same thing, but they're probably doing it a slightly different way, a slightly different approach, and there's different players and different other aspects involved. So strong documented procedures, notes. You know, we talked about this sort of like a list of just knowledge that you have about, you know, the way I generally get all the best intake information from Joe, the intake nurse, is to bring Joe a donut on Mondays. And you know, a new person won't know that if you don't bring Joe that donut on Mondays, you're not going to find out that 5 new potentially eligible participants were included in at the CTP or whatever the case may be. You know, and the other thing is staff development. Developing people not only during this cross-training, that they're able to take on more, they're able to function more. I think Monique was talking about how, you know, she sort of lost her research staff or research associate right at the end. That's a very difficult thing to handle and be able to stretch in that many ways. And you're really going to have well-developed and well-functioning staff for them to do that. And mentorship is a big part of that.
One thing I'd like to add along the lines of documenting procedures and notes, sometimes the SOPs are so formalized and there's a lot of pressure to make them look just so, is to enable your staff to keep a work journal where you do keep little tidbits like Joe likes donuts on Tuesdays. Or where nobody cares if it's spelled right, and it's just something where people are jotting down notes or things to remember. And these are kind of the soft skills that come out of every role that can really be helpful for somebody else who's coming in, especially if you're in the role where you're training somebody new. It's hard to remember what it was like when you first started, to remember all the, oh, don't forget that if you don't do this, then that will fall apart. So sometimes staff journaling is a good tool to allow your staff to take or keep.
Louise, you want to chime in any before we move on to the next section?
No, I think you all covered it.
Okay, yes, ma'am. All right, so now we want to talk a little bit about the importance of this internal customer. And again, this may be a new phrase for you guys. It really comes from the business world and talking about external and internal customers, and your internal customers being your employees, and you know, really you want to take care of your employees so they'll take care of your customers. You know, looking at this next slide, what we're really talking about here is the core research staff, core study staff, and the clinical staff involved, the people who are doing the research trial. These other groups that are sort of at the community treatment program, certainly you want to make sure that the relationships are built with them. And that they know what's going on with your research trial, but you really want to make sure you take care of the people who are directly involved in seeing your participants. So, again, this is what we talked about. You know, the internal customer is your employee, is your staff member. And satisfied external customer, in this case, satisfied research, the lead investigative team, the sponsor, NIDA, and your participants are going to be a sign of success. So if you're satisfying all those groups, it probably is because your internal customers or your employees are satisfied. They're the reasons for that success. You know, the old axiom in business is that you want to treat your employees as you'd like to treat your customers or clients. And we should keep that in mind. We want to try and be courteous and respectful of our employees or our research staff as much as possible. Respect and value their time and their contribution to the project. Be available to them. I think this is a really important point. Have regular meetings. Have regular established meetings that if they have to get canceled, they get rescheduled in a timely manner so that information can be shared. So it's a two-way communication, and it's a a constant two-way communication, and also have informal meetings. There's so much value in just sort of walking around. How was your weekend? What'd you guys do? What happened? You know, that sort of informal touch points with people play a huge role. It keeps that team sort of together. It keeps those lines of communication open. You know, we promote having an open door policy and prompt responses. If they bring a question or a concern or a problem, get back to them, even if you can't resolve the problem. You know, even if I go and I complain how awful it is to work with Liz, if I never hear back anything about it, I think that my supervisors just forgot that I complained about that. Even if they say, I know, well, you know, we can't get rid of Liz. She's got tenure here, whatever the case may be. They come back and they tell me, you know, what the resolution is. That's really important. At least they're closing that loop with me, and that's something that's really important. And again, we're as somebody brought up earlier, it's all about communication and forms of communication and different ways to ensure that communication happens, and it's two-way communication. So again, we're focusing here on, you know, as sort of reaching for the ideal and trying to exceed people's expectations. The only way to exceed somebody's expectations is to know what their expectations are. Don't presume what somebody's expectations are. Try and get to know what their expectations are, and try and know up front if you can meet certainly or exceed those expectations, or try to exceed those expectations. Try and care about, we've talked about this, and this has been a point that we've brought up over and over again, is try and care about the person, not just their productivity. Try and value the person and the person's contribution to the trial, to the site, to the larger, to the CTN. And
also, just to look at that from a slightly different perspective, it's very important for your staff to know what your expectations are, and that is very clearly communicated to them, and that part of the norm of your team becomes to exceed expectations. And there's so many ways of doing that. So certainly it's a reciprocal thing for you to work with your staff, but also for your staff to be very, very clear what your expectations are, and that they are something that they can actually succeed at.
I absolutely agree, and it's funny when you said that, Louise, it reminded me, you know, those years I was in the Navy and I worked in behavioral health, I did a lot of therapy, and I cannot tell you how many times people would come in angry, frustrated, annoyed because somebody wasn't meeting their expectations. And my question would almost always be, do they know? Have you told them what those expectations are? And the answer would almost always be, oh, they know. Really, how do they know? You know, if the expectations aren't clear and laid out both ways, then there's no way of knowing them or meeting them or exceeding them. I couldn't agree more. Thank you very much. And again, like we talked about, continuous communication about the project's direction, about the information. Louise brought up that, you know, oftentimes on national calls, there's how the site's doing, how the recruitment numbers, how these numbers, that numbers, this information, that information. Sharing that with everybody, even if people who can't be on the call, making sure everybody knows how your site's doing in the context of the rest of the sites in the research trial, and how the trial as a whole is going. You know, that's really important information because it adds value to what people are doing day to day. More parts of communication here are really collaborating, having plans for collaboration, soliciting ideas, allowing, as we talked about earlier, allowing staff to design processes or to sort of change or tweak how they're doing things that in ways that are allowable or functional that make more sense or that work better for them. You know,
and this is such an important part of that early team development, the stage where, you know, the lead team gives you the manual of operations, but you have to figure out how you're actually going to do that at your site. The degree to which that's a team effort with everybody feeling that their input is valuable, and as you start doing the trial, that you continue to look for ways of making it work better, and that's a team effort. I think that can be incredibly efficient and effective at building sort of a team cohesion.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the other caveat to that, in my opinion, is that explaining to people that there's not only nothing wrong with bringing problems forward, but it really should be an expectation that, finding something that doesn't work or something that's wrong or something that isn't functional is a huge responsibility as well, because the reality is the people who designed this trial and the people who wrote the manual of operations are hundreds and thousands of miles away from the actual research site. And it sounds good when we're writing it on our computer or when we're talking about it on a conference call, but none of us really know if it actually works. So one of the huge values that research staff bring and the way they can make it better for everybody and make the research better as a whole is to bring up the things that don't work or bring up the problems or the techniques, or if they make a mistake. If they make a mistake, it's not just them making a mistake. It's there was a gap in our training. There was a gap in this. There was a gap in that. Well, let's reevaluate the process. It's not about their individual mistake necessarily as figuring out, okay, well, we figured out what that gap is, and we're going to learn from this and not make this mistake again. So, I think making sure that that's clear and that it's all about, again, that open and open-ended communication. And the last thing here, and again, it's something I think that's often taken for granted, is saying thank you. Just the simple act of saying thank you, being genuine. Thanks, that was a great job. This is a tough week. I really appreciate everything you did this week. We got through this week. Hopefully next week is not anything like this week, or this was a really great week. Thank you very much. You made this a great week, and I think everything you did made this a great, easy, smooth week, and I really appreciate it. Or somewhere in the middle there. But I think it's so easy to lose the value of that. It's so easy to get too busy to have that interpersonal communication that pays such dividends. It's not on the slides right now, but I think it's probably a good time before we move to the next area to open it up again and see if anybody has any comments or questions about anything we've covered so far. That would be *1.
And it does appear that there are no questions or comments.
We'll move on to mentoring recommendation.
Okay. At this point, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about mentoring, and Jack and Liz have asked me to do that because it's something that's been of great interest to me. And as we were preparing for this, we talked some about the different ways that mentoring can take place. And certainly in some agencies there's a formal process for people expressing a particular interest in learning more about a skill or an area that the agency focuses on and requesting a mentor, and that there might be a process for someone who specializes in that particular area to be assigned to do mentoring. I've not had any experience with that kind of a mentoring process. All of my mentoring has really sort of evolved from just out of the supervisory relationship. So if we could go to the next slide. Okay. So the way that I think of mentoring is really encouraging people through observation of that person to learn more about themselves, to learn more about their interest, and then to help them push beyond what they would just do on their own by offering them opportunities to work with you and learn from you and be part of some of the opportunities that come your way, and then passing that on to someone else who you think has potential to learn in a particular area. And so certainly when someone agrees that they are interested in sort of pushing themselves in a particular direction, it's important to support them while they're doing that and realize that it's going to take some time and that it may not be something that they can do very well in the beginning, but that with practice and with continued feedback they can learn to do over time. I typically think of mentoring as kind of a long-term process to really help someone grow professionally. And next on this slide are a list of just a variety of possibilities and ways that you probably have thought of, maybe have experienced, to offer staff opportunities to do things that they might not do in their regular job, but that will contribute to their job satisfaction and to their professional development. You certainly can offer staff an opportunity to attend conferences or perhaps to present at conferences. They might co-present with you. And the opportunities that some of the staff who have worked with me have had to do that. I mean, from an RA 1 year out of her bachelor's program who was interested in doing that, and I think she was scared to death the first time she did it, but then subsequently has done it many times since then. So that co-presenting, I think, is a great way for people to have opportunities. To present posters, certainly to work with someone, to be a co-author on a poster at a scientific meeting, or to work with you on developing a manuscript, whether it's for a peer-reviewed journal or for a magazine or for a newsletter for that matter, but to do some writing and helping people that way. Staff can also get involved to some degree with budget preparation, understanding how the budget process works, understanding what the money is associated with their particular area, attend budget meetings and come to understand that process. One of the things that's been most helpful for me in my experience with the CTN is actually getting to the place of working on protocol development, where you can help a protocol development team know that even though something might be a good idea, what's the feasibility of actually doing that in a community treatment program? And in the same way that that's been very useful for me and a role that I've enjoyed, making that available to staff. RAs can certainly help with developing the case report forms and can be involved in that process. And then outside of the strict research, if staff is allowed to have the time to attend community meetings or to present to the community on the topic of the research or on something about the research, that's a really good opportunity as well. And then there are opportunities for didactic training on management and leadership and the degree to which you can make that sort of experience available to your staff. I think all of those things have the potential to really create an investment in research on the part of the staff that goes beyond just a specific protocol, but that they can develop a sense that research is something that they want to do for the rest of their life, because it's beyond just following the protocol and implementing the SOPs. To see it in a broader context, I think is very useful. And then the next slide is just talking about that takes support. If you're going to spend your time being a mentor or allowing staff to be mentored and do things like community presentations, you really need to have the support of your RRTC to spend your time in that way, and we've been very fortunate to have that. And again, we talked about earlier the importance of giving feedback to staff so that they know what they're doing well and what they might improve. If they've made a presentation, to be able to spend time with them, giving them feedback or talking with them about that. And then always, of course, sharing the recognition and rewards. In the CTN, there's lots of opportunity for people to be recognized for doing things like participating in dissemination activities or publications, and just making sure that the frontline staff that have gone out on a limb and tried to do something that was beyond what they typically do, that they get recognized for that. and then just passing it on. I mean, all the opportunities that I have had in the CTN have just been invaluable to me, and it's a lot of fun to share that with younger staff, staff who are interested in their professional development. It's been a very rewarding part of the job for me.
Great. Thanks, Louise. And mentoring is something that you've proven to be very, very competent at and have shown a great interest in. And it's a very, very key component to establishing a learning culture in the network. And some really great people have been developed through that mentoring process that you provide. What I wanted to go through here is just somewhat of a summary slide. I think a lot of the concepts we've brought up aren't new concepts to most of the people on the call, but I think, at least we hope, that we've provided a different viewpoint on it, or a different way to remind you, remember, apply these theories, and you'll meet a better outcome. One of the things I wanted to bring up again is the stages of development. As a staff member comes in, you go through the stages of forming, storming, norming, and performing, and it makes a very big difference if that process happens at the same rate for all members as it does on a new project versus somebody coming in on an already established process. It presents very different challenges. So it's also very important to recognize and value the staff coming from other organizational cultures. Those people coming from different cultures have different viewpoints, different skill sets, and they can see deficiencies and make recommendations that can really make an impact on a process that you have just been running along with day by day. I think it's very, very important to have roles defined and to have expectations defined. There's a reason why they publish books on what to expect when you're expecting. People want to know what's going to happen to them. And I think it's important to recognize that as the stages do really kind of show themselves as forming, norming, storming, or performing, it kind of helps you recognize a particular situation as being just a phase rather than something that otherwise you might view more crisis-oriented. Again, along with the role definition, the clarity of responsibility and expectations on a day-to-day basis, showing somebody what you want from them, what you'd like to get from them, what you feel is good for their contributions to the project, and what are the things that you can bring to them to help things move along in a better way. Again, I think that the concepts may not be new on all fronts here, but there's definitely some opportunities to apply them in a really productive way in protocol development life cycle. So right now I'd like to present the opportunity for people to ask questions or provide comments.
Once again, that is *1 if you have a question or comment.
And again, I'd like to take the opportunity to really, really thank Louise Haynes for presenting on this topic that she has definitely shown an expertise, and Jack Chally has been a really, really great contributor in the web seminar series on many of the communication skill sets that he has. It's really great to have people in the network sharing their expertise. That's part of, again, what develops a learning culture and helps our network grow as a whole. And in one way or another, we are mentoring each other by doing so.
Liz, thank you so much for organizing all of this and helping us get our thoughts in some kind of cohesive fashion. Thank you.
Very welcome.
Which is a real challenge, given some of you.
I would say.
Not talking about you, Louise. And to that point, I would encourage all of you who are on the phone who haven't had a chance to participate in the web seminar series, if you're interested, let Liz know. She makes it very easy for presenters and provides a real platform and hounds you as necessary to get things done and do this, and it's a really rewarding and valuable experience. So I would encourage you to participate at the presenter level as well.
And again, I'd like to thank everybody for clearing your calendar for a second time to join the session. If indeed you know somebody who did miss the session, we will have the session, it is recorded, we will have it available on the CTN Dissemination Library as well as on LiveLink. And if neither one of those work for you, we put them down on CDs and send them out to all the node coordinators who then distribute it out to the site. So the trainings are available for you if you do happen to miss the live webinars. Thanks everybody very much for attending today.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Once again, that does conclude our conference for today. Thank you again for your participation.